Time to get into what was considered the biggest blight on the Doctor Who franchise since the last biggest blight on the Doctor Who franchise 3 years earlier. I remember watching this very early on in my Doctor Who fan prime, so with that I didn't totally understand what I was watching. I remember liking it, but since I had, I think, only watched Doctors 9 and 10, I didn't fully understand the full nature of the history of Doctor Who, which, to be fair, was the point when initially made and broadcast. It was made to introduce American fans into the series in the hopes of making a new show, but it was definitely an interesting watch, now knowing more history in regards to the character. I'm not going to get into the history of the movie though, because its history has been told time and time again because of how infamously awful it was by writer John Leekley. If you are unfamiliar, then read some of the links I have below because I want to focus on my thoughts on the television film itself. With that, we'll get into it. First things first, let's talk the Doctor himself. I kind of forgot how genuinely fucking great Paul McGann is as the Doctor. As of right now, I have only watched this, The Night of the Doctor, and listened to one audio story with McGann. So I still haven't dug deep in terms of McGann as the Doctor, but despite this, I fucking loved him here. While he doesn't get too much screen time, with the 7th Doctor being around for almost a third of the story, I still feel as though he found his personality and nailed the character of the Doctor. To me, he is pretty much the 5th Doctor, but done right. More of a down-to-earth and human portrayal than the egotistical and sarcastic portrayal of the 6th and the dark manipulator of the 7th, as well as being the least alien of all the Doctors, which I think worked here. He also had some tidbits of other Doctors as well, like the authoritativeness of the 1st, the goofiness of the 2nd, the action-oriented nature of the 3rd, and the free-spirited optimism of the 5th, and the quirkier aspects of 4, 6, and 7. While it could be argued that he's too American, like the romantic aspects with Grace and other such human qualities, I think those things can be forgiven in the long run. If I had to place him anywhere, I would probably rate him my 7th favorite Doctor, but despite this, there's a lot of good, really damn good competition, so don't expect that to be a bad placement. Don't worry. So, in terms of the story, it does feel very run-of-the-mill and somewhat generic, as well as not making a ton of sense. I don't think the Master was the right course of action, and trust me, we'll get into him much later, in terms of the villain, and after a certain point, there's less of a focus on the Doctor, and more so on the problem at hand, which wouldn't be bad, as that does sound very Doctor Who, which is normally about the situation and not the Doctor. This was intended to be a pilot for a new show, so when you have major parts of your story not feature the Doctor, who we are still trying to get to know, feels off to me. Especially when you have people watching who might not know who the Doctor even is, especially when the Doctor has amnesia. I feel as though the first act was about the 7th Doctor and how he regenerates, much of the second act was about the 8th Doctor remembering who he is and realizing the situation at hand, and then the third act is about stopping the end of the world. I think if it was a smaller knit story with a not very popular villain to get to know the new Doctor, maybe in the likes of Robot, I think would have been better. But the fact that this was helmed by Americans, it had to be bigger and better, despite being a TV movie. But I will say, for a lot of problems it does have, it's at least fun and enjoyable. Now that we have so much media in regards to the 8th Doctor, it's fun to sit back and watch his humble beginnings, now that so many terrific writers have improved him, whether that be Big Finish or his various novels. Now we shall get into the villain of the Master, who is played by Eric Roberts, and the big name that the producers oh so coveted when making this flick. While he is the most hated of all the Masters, he wasn't too bad. I will say, until the third act, when most of the movie falls apart, he was actually quite good and pretty creepy. While I think he was too alien at certain points, like not understanding certain human phrases and that sort of thing, I think his Master was pretty good. He does get pretty campy and kinda bad in the third act, but honestly, compared to Anthony Ainley at his worst and the encapsulation of John Sims' Master, it's really not that bad to me. Could have been worse because you do get that creepiness that we hadn't gotten a ton of during the classic era, and the intelligent scheming from the Master. However, it could have been better when he does get incredibly campy, does appear like an idiot at points, and I feel as though Eric Roberts isn't giving it his all when he has proven to be a much better actor in better projects. In terms of the companion in Grace Holloway, she was certainly one of the better companions to come out of Doctor Who. The only negative I have to say about her is her romantic feelings for the Doctor, which could be the basis for later companions like Rose and Martha, somewhat unfortunately. She was intelligent and logical, always trying to find a very real solution to a current problem. While she did have some of the smarmy sarcasm some female companions are known to have, she didn't overdo it like some other smart aleck companions that the Doctor has traveled with. Not saying I don't like that, because Donna is one of my favorite companions, but I do like that more grounded approach. With that, her character does somewhat diminish in the third act because you do lose some of that more logical reasoning that she has, and just sort of goes along with what the Doctor is saying with none of the personality that made her so enjoyable. You could make the argument that she was possibly developing as a character and was more open to that idea of a world beyond hers, or she was purely under the Master's control. And I would probably agree with that, but I think there was a way to have it a bit of a better balance. But I'm not saying she purely changed character based on the scene later in the movie, unlike some later companions in the show's run. But I wish there was a bit more to her is all. Despite this, I do think she is a very good companion, and definitely an underrated one. Overall, while it is incredibly flawed, I couldn't help but admire this movie in a way. It's just sort of this weird blip in Doctor Who's history and how some younger people were introduced to the character. Paul McGann is magnificent as the Doctor, and despite not getting a ton of screen time, still managed to nail the core aspects of the Doctor as a character, while also creating something that was his own spin on the character, all within a 90-minute television movie, when some Doctors failed to do this for multiple serials or even their entire run. Grace Holloway is a delightful companion and very underrated, despite her romantic feelings for the Doctor. While Eric Roberts as the Master is pretty campy and kinda bad in the third act, I felt he did too much good in his time as the character to be a necessarily bad Master, especially when John Sim is overly praised for doing worse shit. The overall story is a bit generic and run-of-the-mill Doctor Who, and doesn't really do a ton new in terms of the franchise. Despite McGann somehow making his version of the character work in less than 90 minutes, I really wish he did more or had more to do, especially when we barely got anything from him in the third act. Which is most definitely the worst part of the movie, as it goes way too dumb way too quickly. Grace becomes uninteresting, the Master is too campy, and the problem overtakes the Doctor when in a regeneration story shouldn't be the case, at least to me. Also, Chang Li was a decent idea in terms of the Master having a companion, but there wasn't much to talk about with him, so I just wanted to make a quick mention here. Overall, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Now we move on to The Night of the Doctor, and I'll try to make this quick. The Night of the Doctor serves as a great bookend to 8's run as the Doctor, with the television movie being whimsical and fun, showing a romanticized and optimistic Doctor. This webisode shows a tired and worn Doctor towards the end of his life, even before he was actually killed, meaning that he was emotionally dead before his actual death, mainly because of the Time War. This 6-minute video just showcases that Paul McGann was gypped at really playing the Doctor on the small screen, and especially gypped out of having a real role in the anniversary special, but we'll get to that mess when we get there. The story is simple, with the Doctor regenerating into the Warrior after a fatal crash. In the beginning minutes, we almost get a typical Doctor Who story, with someone being in a fatal situation, and the Doctor stepping in to save the day.
I'm a doctor, but probably not the one you expected.
But the expectations are subverted, and with only a few lines of dialogue, we get the gravity of the last great Time War and the Doctor's role in it. How someone is willing to die despite hope being only a few feet away due to what the Time Lords had become in the Time War. How they and the Daleks are barely distinguishable at this point. Say what you will about Stephen Moffat. He is a bad showrunner and an even worse person, but when he writes well, it's fucking golden. In under a minute, McGann manages to nail the character of the Doctor on screen and cement his presence in this story, just further showcasing McGann's talent as the character and what he could have done if given the chance outside of audios. The only real reason to watch this is for him and what the Doctor's role in the Time War was before he became the Warrior. The story is good, and his regeneration is damn good, and even somewhat emotional. But McGann is the star here, and he makes sure you know it. However, it still makes me angry due to the context and what this leads to, but again, we'll get there when we get there. But for right now, I will give Night of the Doctor an 8.5 out of 10. But for now, that's it. for at least a while. I'm going to be taking a month-long break, and the next video should be out on August 6th. I wanted to take a break because I have a lot going on in my life, and I need to take some time for myself, as well as putting a lot of work into Monster Madness 5. If you are curious for any of my videos in the future, please go to the About tab on my channel to see when they'll be released, since I can't make community posts just yet. With that, I'll see you in August, when I will be talking about Phase 4 of the DCEU project, or possibly an impromptu video in between. See you then.